There's a kind of silence most people don't talk about. Not the silence of an empty room, but the silence that comes after years of noise. The silence of a phone you no longer check, of messages you don't feel pressure to answer, of invitations you don't rush to explain away. And what surprises you isn't the loneliness, it's the relief. Most people see this and assume something is wrong, that you've become cold, detached, closed off. But emotional withdrawal isn't what most people think it is, and the psychology behind it is often completely misread. Emotional withdrawal doesn't equal cutting everyone off. From the outside, it looks simple. You stopped replying, you stopped showing up, you stopped initiating. So people say you cut everyone off. But emotional withdrawal isn't a dramatic decision. You didn't wake up one day angry, you didn't make a list and cross people out. What happened was quieter than that. It began the moment responding started to feel heavy, when every message came with an expectation, when every interaction required emotional labor you no longer had. You didn't disappear from relationships, you stopped supplying emotional access. And when that access disappears, many relationships don't survive, not because you destroyed them, but because they were built on your availability. People don't miss you, they miss the version of you that was always reachable. When overgiving stops making sense. For a long time, you were the reliable one, the one who checked in, the one who listened, the one who showed up even when I cost you something. You didn't keep score. You assumed this was what connection looked like, until the moment you needed the same effort back. You reached out, not dramatically, not desperately, just honestly. And what you found wasn't cruelty, it was inconsistency. Responses slowed, availability vanished, support turned into polite words with no follow-through. That's when something subtle happened. You didn't feel angry, you felt aware. You started noticing how often you adjusted your schedule, how often conversations centered on their problems, how often you gave energy without receiving presents in return. At some point, continuing to give didn't feel generous anymore. It felt careless. So you stopped pouring, not to punish, but because pouring was costing you something real.
Your nervous system learned before you did. This shift didn't begin with a conscious realization. It began with pattern recognition. Your nervous system started noticing the same ending repeated with different people. You open up, you trust, you invest. And when things get heavy, when you need support instead of strength, the connection thins. Your body remembers this before your mind names it. That's why emotional withdrawal doesn't feel dramatic. It feels instinctive. Not because you expect disappointment, but because your system has learned that connection often comes with a delayed cost. This isn't cynicism. It's adaptation. The brain isn't trying to isolate you. It's trying to prevent another emotional injury. Why you started leaving first. When abandonment becomes predictable, control becomes valuable, and the only control you have is timing. Leaving first doesn't mean you want to be alone. It means you want to avoid being caught off guard again. So instead of waiting for distance to appear, you create it gently. You reply less, you initiate less, you stop explaining yourself. Not to test people, but to observe reality without effort. And what you learn is uncomfortable. Most connections don't chase you. They don't ask why you disappeared. They don't adjust. Which tells you something important. You weren't being chosen. You were being used. Leaving first doesn't break the relationship. It reveals whether one existed at all. Emotional withdrawal is not hatred. People often confuse withdrawal with resentment, but resentment is loud. It argues. It replays conversations. Emotional withdrawal is quiet. You're not angry enough to fight. You're too tired to explain. You don't need revenge. You need rest. Explaining yourself would mean justifying pain to people who didn't notice it in the first place. So you stop. Not because you don't care, but because caring has become unsustainable. This isn't emotional numbness. It's emotional conservation.
Why isolation feels safer than connection. From the outside, isolation looks unhealthy. But for someone who's been repeatedly disappointed, Isolation isn't punishment, it's relief. When you're alone, expectations disappear. There's no waiting, no wondering if someone will show up this time. Isolation removes the variable that keeps hurting you. The loneliness people warn you about is often quieter than the loneliness you felt surrounded by others, because being unseen while connected is more painful than being alone by choice. Isolation doesn't create the emptiness, it ends the pretending. Boundaries, walls, and the cost of repetition. People say you've built walls, but walls don't appear randomly. They're built from repetition. Boundaries fail when they're crossed repeatedly without consequence. Eventually, the system escalates. Emotional withdrawal is often that escalation. Not because you want distance forever, but because you need space to recalibrate what safe connection even feels like. This isn't the end of relationships. It's a refusal to participate in ones that require constant self-sacrifice. Withdrawal isn't rejection, it's selection. You're not cold, you're clear. You're not closed off, you're protected. Emotional withdrawal isn't about hating people. It's about no longer participating in relationships that require you to diminish yourself to stay. You stopped chasing being seen. You stopped proving your worth. You stopped paying emotional costs you couldn't afford anymore. And in that quiet space, something changed. Not isolation, not bitterness, but the calm that comes from finally choosing yourself. If this video put words to something you felt but never explained, you're not alone. You don't have to share details. Just leave a simple, "I get it," in the comments. And if you want more videos that quietly decode human behavior, you can subscribe to Inner Sense. No noise, just clarity.